Welcome to the Superintendent's Hangout, where we discuss topics in education, charter schools, life in general, and not necessarily in that order. I'm your host, Dr. Sharetta. Come on in and hang out. In this episode, I had the distinct pleasure of sitting down for a wide-ranging conversation with Dr. Doug Fisher. Dr. Fisher is professor of educational leadership at San Diego State University. He's a teacher leader at Health Sciences High School, also located in San Diego. And previously, Dr. Fisher was an early intervention teacher and elementary school educator. This highly accomplished educator is the recipient of an International Reading Association William S. Gray Citation of Merit and an Exemplary Leader Award from the Conference on English Leadership of NCTE. Dr. Fisher has published numerous articles on teaching and learning, as well as books such as The Teacher Clarity Playbook, PLC Plus, Visible Learning for Literacy, Comprehension, The Skill, Will, and Thrill of Reading, How Tutoring Works, and most recently, How Learning Works. A search for articles by Dr. Fisher yields a treasure trove of research and reflections on how to improve our teaching on behalf of all students. Dr. Fisher and I touch on a range of topics in education, from teacher clarity to helicopter parenting and much, much more. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. Welcome, Dr. Fisher, to the Superintendent's Hangout. I really appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you. Appreciate the invitation to be here.
I thought we could start at the beginning with your origin story, where you come from, what important events in your life steered you towards this present moment, and what you're doing today.
Sure. So I've been born and raised in San Diego. I've only ever lived in San Diego. I went to Vista La Mesa, Lemon Grove Junior High, and then my family moved way out to Alpine, way past Alpine, and I was bused down to Valhalla High School. I only applied to one college, San Diego State. My counselor just helped me fill out an application. We put it in the mail, and luckily I got accepted to San Diego State. When I was at Vista La Mesa, when I would finish my work, I had two choices. I either would go peer tutor, either kindergarten, first or second grade, or I would go to the library, where my mom was a assistant in there, a library media assistant. So I would choose to peer tutor, and I really liked it. And so I told my high school teachers I either wanted to go into healthcare or I wanted to go into education. And my counselor said, there's a lot more money in healthcare, why don't you do that? So I applied to San Diego State Pre-Med, got into pre-med program, started studying that, and it really didn't fit. And I got into speech and language and how the brain learns, and started taking classes in that, changed my major, and said, this is the program for me. This is what I want to be doing. And became an educator. Loved what I do. My stepmother was a fourth grade teacher in Lakeside for 36 years before she retired. So I also had that influence from the time I was very young of watching teachers and the work that teachers do. So either healthcare or education. And it turned out I gave a little 1.5 semester view of healthcare and decided, no, that's not the right one for me.
So it sounds like you've really had an opportunity over the course of your career to see a lot of change in education, and perhaps some circular change, right? In some areas we come back to where we were 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit in general terms to kind of things you see currently in education and what you've seen in the past leading up to this present moment. And where you think we're going. I know those are big questions.
Big questions. Big questions. So I think we've been focused on academics, and what we mean by academics has changed over the years. I remember the very first standards conference I ever went to. Like, we're going to have standards. And now people take it for granted that states articulate standards across the state. The original PLC movement was coming together so you could talk about what we wanted kids to learn, because the state didn't provide standards. So third grade was different across the whole school. So originally we came together in learning communities to say, what is it we expect kids to learn? That has changed a bit. I think we look more of the whole child now. I think we're much more in tune to the well-being, the life skills of students, not just their academic skills. I think student-teacher relationships have remained, central to what we do. Young people come to school and they expect to be treated a certain way. They expect to have respect. They expect to develop relationships that are growth-producing. That hasn't changed. I think some of our journeys into different assessments have changed. We struggle with figuring out how to document student learning. I was looking back at something the other day Ralph Tyler wrote in, I think, 1949. He says, what do you want your students to learn, and what evidence will you accept that they learned it? I mean, this is a long time ago. And I think that second question we're still struggling with. What does it mean to demonstrate understanding, mastery, competence? And we go about it in different ways as the times change. So we move much more into projects, or we move much more into constructed response, multiple choice, or we move much more into writing. And we still struggle with, how do students demonstrate that understanding?
I was looking at the introduction to the Teacher Clarity Playbook that you co-authored, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, John Hattie, I think, wrote the intro,
forward. Mm-hmm.
the foreword.
Yep.
And I don't have it right in front of me, but synthesizing it, he talks about, imagine if you went into a classroom as a student and you had no idea what was expected of you. You knew you had to do something. You had to do something, and you had to keep doing that something until the bell rang. And if you finished it before that point, the teacher would come and ask you to do something else. Mm-hmm. But you never really knew if you got there.
Right.
Why do you think it is that we oftentimes still in classrooms have a lack of clarity when, as adults in our personal and professional lives outside of an educational setting, we demand clarity? Mm-hmm. I mean, you would never have come to this podcast today if you didn't know the purpose of coming, and mm-hmm. I never would have dared to ask you, right? And so why is that? What's so kind of squishy about education in that regard, right, where that outcome piece is so difficult sometimes to define?
It's awesome. So the business world, the government, there's so much people write about clarity all the time. Credited to Brene Brown, but probably from other sources, clarity is kind, unclear is unkind. I mean, clarity is the antidote to anxiety, Buckingham. So people have been talking about this for a really long time. When there's clarity of what is expected of me, it's a calming effect. I can judge my own progress. And I think there's several reasons why educators haven't really embraced this clarity idea. And one of them is we don't always know what success looks like because we were really good at school, by and large, and we've internalized. We have this expert blind spot of, I know how to do mathematics, I know how to read, I know how to write, whatever it is. And we don't know the interim steps to be successful. So we kind of struggle with that. Whereas novices, when they first get it, they're like, oh, I can do this now, I can do this now. So I think part of it is that expert blind spot that exists. I think part of it, some teachers say to me all the time, some teachers will regularly say to me, look, I don't want to tell them what success looks like because I'm giving away. And I say, what are you giving away? I said, what if I came in to evaluate you? I'm going to show up in your classroom and I'm not going to tell you what I'm looking for. How comfortable would you be? And it's the same kind of situation. Students walk in, they're not sure what success looks like. There are a lot of teachers who were trained with behavioral objectives. I mean, we wrote behavioral objectives. There was no requirement to have success criteria included in there. And I remember writing, 80% of the time. Well, 80%, you could miss a different thing each time and still hit 80% and have no idea, did you actually reach the destination? And everybody makes a connection to their GPS systems because now we have all these, high-end technology. We all want to get there. We make mid-course corrections, but we end up arriving at the destination. And that's where clarity allows us to be. Clarity allows us to say, am I getting there? The last thing I'll say on this one, though, is when you have clarity, you can really check to see what you expect, how you communicate expectations. Are they appropriately rigorous for our students? Or are expectations not?
It's interesting. There's a book in my office. It's a Zen meditation guide, and it talks about the beginner's mindset. And it's almost like the opposite of an example of Michael Jordan, who was perhaps the greatest of all time. Mm-hmm. We could debate that all day. But a terrible coach.
Mm-hmm.
When he was a player coach at the end of his career, he was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't tolerate players who were not at his level, but he couldn't coach them to even get halfway to his level. He just inherently expected them to be better than they were.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting to reflect on. I wanted to return to this idea of PLCs, and you know, you've written about PLC plus.
Mm-hmm.
I was recently at a school in California. I won't use the name, but I was on a WASC visit, and you've been working with them, and they were very. When they heard I was from San Diego, they said, "Oh, do you know Dr. Fisher?" So you'd been doing some PLC plus work with their district. And I was wondering if you could speak about the definition, the appropriate definition of a PLC, as opposed to educators kind of hanging out and talking about education. And I'll give you a concrete example. In this WASC visit, I was interviewing one of the subgroups, and they said, we're so good at PLCs that even when we pass each other in the hallway, that counts as a PLC. And so I was wondering if you could speak to what a PLC and a PLC plus really are.
Sure. PLC's been around for a lot of decades. A lot of decades. And as I said earlier, they originally part of the conversation is, what do you want kids to learn? Because there were widely different expectations because we didn't have articulated frameworks or standards. So that's part of the genesis. But if you go back to someone like Shirley Hord, who was watching grown-ups work and saying, there are certain ways that grown-ups work that get better results. And that could be applied to the work of teachers. And she's one of the original architects. There was all this energy years ago. And like this big study came out, the first one on professional learning communities. Shirley Hord's white paper came out on professional. There was all this really interesting stuff that was coming out. And all of them at the time said it's about collective responsibility. Some people say now that's collective efficacy, which is very popular in the leadership world. But the origination of the idea was collective responsibility, that this team of teachers takes collective responsibility for the learners. They don't say, your students did this, my students did this. And what do I see now in a lot of what's called PLCs? My students average 78, what did your students get? And it's not a collective responsibility.
Silos.
It's silos. And people individually saying, my students did better than yours, my students did worse than yours. That's not the origination of the idea. It was around collective responsibility and whatever it takes. And so a grade level or a department or whatever would say, these 10 kids really had a hard time. What are we going to do? And they might be in different classes. So I would like to return to this idea of collective responsibility on a team. I also have argued that in the next generation of PLCs, we don't have to limit teams to grade level or content area. And there's this tradition that if you're a third grade teacher, you must be on the third grade team because you're going to give a common formative assessment and you have to analyze the results. The challenge with that is we have a bunch of singletons who teach one thing. We have teachers who teach more than one thing. I teach world history and U.S. history. Which team do I go to? And the other half of my students suffer. So we haven't been able to embrace that. Then the problem with common formative assessments is they take too many weeks for teachers to develop them, and they're not spending enough time on what they mean. And a lot of us are not good test makers. We didn't go to school to be psychometricians and write really good assessments. So we have this challenge with it. I do think teams should bring evidence to the table, but I don't think it has to be a common formative assessment. And I think teams can be configured in all kinds of ways. A current team at our school has science teachers, history teachers, and English language arts teachers on it, and they are looking at writing, claim, evidence, reasoning. And they bring evidence to every one of their team meetings. And they're looking at, and they've noticed, students are really good at making claims. They're reasonably good at supplying evidence for those claims, but they're not very good at the reasons, connecting that evidence to that claim. And it's an important skill. I'm not sure they would have noticed that if they were siloed into science and siloed into history. And I think there's some power. Like, why couldn't a grade 3, 4, 5 group of teachers come together and look at academic vocabulary? And they would bring evidence of academic vocabulary because we still have redundancies and gaps because we don't allow for vertical conversations. We only allow horizontal. So I would argue there's a next generation of professional learning communities, and those are two of the areas I would look for. I think next we also need to address equity directly. There's never been a PLC model that directly says what are the intended and unintended actions and consequences. We have too closely tied RTI or MTSS to PLC. And it seems that every team's solution when kids don't learn is they go to intervention. And I think some students do need intervention. But what if some students need barrier removal? Or what if some students need different opportunities to learn? The worry I have is when teams of teachers say these kids didn't learn from us and they need to go to intervention, they are abdicating their collective responsibility and thus compromising the whole vision of what PLCs should have done.
Extending the concept of teacher clarity, I know you visit probably thousands of classrooms a year.
Yep.
I visit a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, most classrooms at any level, certainly pre-K 12, are chock full of posters and signs and pieces of paper stuck to the wall.
Mm-hmm.
There's very little vertical real estate available.
Right.
And it's almost as if the implication is if you remove something, that's somehow wrong. Like there's some unwritten educational rules that poster boards are supposed to have borders around them made out of paper that with scalloped edges and certain kind of lettering at certain grade levels and just stuff.
Yep.
And this is not research based at my end. This is my visceral reaction as someone who's wrestled my whole life with attention issues. I become overwhelmed. And so can you talk about how teacher clarity fits into classroom design and environment? For my full disclosure, Dr. Uline from San Diego State was my dissertation chair. She was the second one because my first one had to retire because I took a little too long on my dissertation.
Yep.
But that's okay. I made it. But she's done a lot of research in classroom environment and campus design. How does what the walls look like play in and connect to teacher clarity?
Awesome. So we think about the teachers that students have. So obviously one of the teachers is the person who's paid to be there, the teacher or the staff. The second teacher is the peers, and we learn a lot from our peers. The third teacher is the environment that is created and how much you can learn from the environment you're in. And overstimulating environments destroy clarity because there's nothing that says, where should I focus? There's nothing that says, what resources do I need to engage in this learning? There's an idea out there, as you were noting, we have to put up all of this student work. Well, that's a brag thing. It's finished work. It's already done. It's already graded. Why are we spending all of our time putting up that? They already know what they did. Where is the resource that I am using in this environment to learn? And are the resources that are in this room so overwhelming for me that I can barely pay attention to what my teacher and my peers are saying? I do think students should know what they're learning. I think they should know what success looks like. That's good real estate to me. Because if I get lost and I'm confused and I'm not sure what's happening, if I can look up and say, oh, that's what success, oh, we're talking about past tense. That's right, and I'm back to work. If I have a sound wall and I'm trying to figure out some words and I'm trying to write and I have a sound wall resource and I can go to the sound wall and I can say, oh, that's the spelling pattern, I forgot that, and come back, that's contributing. I think part of teacher clarity, when you look at the 4 components, the major components, one is organization. How is the lesson organized to allow students to accomplish what they're supposed to learn? Part of that organization is the physical environment. Part of it is the flow and pace of the lesson. And when we violate any of that, we go way too fast or we go way too slow. We introduce things out of a weird order, or the environment is so distracting. We're compromising organization, which means we're going to compromise the learning experiences that allow students to probably meet the success criteria.
So where do you think that comes from? Is it the fact that we've never, at the leadership level or in terms of in the education sector, never really given folks permission to take things down.
Yep.
It seems to me like if you and I never emptied our closets out for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And just kept buying clothes.
Yep. What it would look like.
Yeah.
I think there's the permissions issue. I think a lot of our educators, they were successful in school. They like an environment that's really decorated. Many educators did not experience trauma, and they don't know what it's like to be in an environment that's so overstimulating and so filled with neon colors and things dangling from the ceiling and moving all the time, and I can't see the door, and all of these things. So I think a lot goes into the environment. I also worry about how much is the off-limits space, how much is the dedicated to the teacher-only space. And I keep thinking about this. This is our classroom. And yes, teachers need work area, and they need storage area. I totally get that. But how does the flow of the room feel to students? Do they see signs that says, "You're not welcome here. Keep out"? Because I see those in school. I walk around and I think, if I was here.
Don't touch.
Yeah, don't touch. Keep out. Off limits. There are kinder ways to say that.
You accompanied our admin team across our two campuses for a classroom, kind of walk the halls, read the walls experience with when students were not in classrooms.
Right.
And you made some comments about the position of the classroom door in relation to the way and the direction that students were facing in the classroom and where the quote-unquote teaching station was. Could you speak to that in the context of students who have experienced trauma and actually adults who have too?
Yeah, adults and students. So one of the generalizations we'll make on when people have experienced trauma is they want to see exit routes and they want to see who's coming in. It's a safety. It lowers our blood pressure. It lowers our anxiety when we can do that. The other thing about the room arrangement is if someone needs to leave to use the restroom, it can't disrupt the whole class. And so we sometimes see places where the room is oriented where if you have to leave the room for something, you will be a spectacle as you cross. And so if your personality is, I need to grab attention because I don't want to be embarrassed, you're going to goof off. You're going to say something. You're going to be the joker to gain attention. And then you're in trouble. So room orientation is an important thing. Where should students look to find information? How do they track the teacher around the room as the teacher is talking? How do they know where the resources are? There are some really bad designs of classrooms, and positioning the teacher really far away from the door can also present some safety issues. If something happens, I can't get to the door and protect the kids in this class. So I think there's a lot that goes into how we organize that physical environment, always with the lens, is this environment helping or contributing to students' learning? It's not a decoration. It's not a show for me. It's not so that when my peers come in, they say, "Oh, your room's so pretty," and "Oh, look, you changed for this holiday and this holiday." That's not what it's about. It's about, does this environment contribute to the learning of the students who are there?
I come back to the at times tension between spaces that are designed around adult convenience.
Yep.
So we were having this conversation. We're in the midst of designing our future high school building and layout, and I have been pretty firm about saying if we have projectors, touch screen, whatever the technology is going to be in 4 or 5 years, that it needs to be on wheels so it can move. And by the way, it's not going to be fixed so that the teacher is the only one who can see the door.
Yep.
And I got some pushback because teachers said, "But wait a second, we don't want our students facing the door because then they're going to get distracted by people walking by on the outside." And so it's an interesting tension between those two, right? It's not a criticism of teachers, but
a valid worry.
Yeah.
Especially if you have kids in the hallway a lot who put their faces in the doors or open the door or look in the windows. And you have to balance that with, if I can't see the door and the door opens, it will stop my learning and I will turn to find out who's in that room. That will happen because now I don't know if there's a threat walking in this room. So they don't have to directly face the door, but can they see the door? Can they see exit routes? Can they see, or is the room so distracting? I mean, there are rooms where I can see the door, but there's no way I can get to it because there's so much furniture and it's arranged in such an inconvenient way, I couldn't get to the door if I needed to. And so I think we need a lot more learning about the environment, including what goes on the walls. These commercially produced, posters, teamwork, everyone achieves more.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Yeah. Do we need that on the wall? Or should we have students construct? What does it look like, feel like, and sound like when you have a great conversation with your peers? Put that on the wall and let them self-assess and say, did we do these things today? Because then they will know what it feels like to be part of an effective team.
My daughter had an interesting educational journey, K-12. She started out in a private Waldorf school and then went to a big charter high school for 4 years that was probably 10 times the size of her entire K-8 school.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've kind of compared those two. And one of the things that I took away from her K-8 experience was that in Waldorf schools, the aesthetic is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's entirely tied to learning objectives, I can't comment on that, but just even color of paint in classrooms and positioning of the desk and where the light comes in the classroom. And I remember having conversations with their leadership saying, hey, I think you need to have walkie-talkie. The classrooms didn't have phones in them.
Mm-hmm.
And the teachers were not allowed to have their cell phones on because they have a technology policy and a stance against technology. So I was like, well, okay, so there's got to be a way other than carrier pigeons that we can connect classrooms in the case of emergency. But even the conversation around a walkie-talkie what became controversial. And eventually they landed on this idea that they were going to have a walkie-talkie in the corner and they were going to cover it with a colored veil. And so in some ways that's the opposite of what I see so often in most other public school settings, right? Which is just everything in there.
Right.
And apart from the learning objectives, just I don't think most people would decorate their homes that way.
Right.
At least I hope not.
Hope not.
So
and some rooms are so messy. It looks there's no respect in for the students here. I mean, there's just junk everywhere, and not that it's dirty,
right?
But
Clutter.
It's just clutter and stuff, and it's from years in the past. And the environment. I think we could do a whole bunch of work on the environment and the feel of the room. So at our school, we let teachers choose their paint colors within a range of colors. The rooms look very different if you walk the campus. The room reflects the teacher's personality and the student's construction of that, and it should reflect what they're learning. And I don't want to see a bunch of generic stuff on walls. I want to see things that are there for a reason, that have educational value to them, and I'd like to see it rotate as the year goes on to say, we're no longer in this unit, so we don't need that stuff right now. We're in this next unit now, and we need to do this stuff.
That's great feedback because and something really I'm going to reflect on in our daily work with especially as we move forward to design a high school and thinking about grades 9 through 12 and the opportunity that we have to design around our programs. How do you define this concept of academic rigor? It's something that is batted around all the time. I know my board has periodically injected that into strategic plan documents, into my evaluation, into conversation, and it's not ill-intentioned in any way, but we've never gotten to be able to agree on what academic rigor is. So what does academic rigor mean to you, Dr. Fisher, in your university work as well as in your high school leadership?
Rigor is a term we throw around in education a lot, and some people will say, you know it when you see it. Well, I don't think you can plan for that. I don't think that's a good definition. I'm also interested, I'll make a detour here before I answer rigor, high expectations teaching. And there are actually a number of studies, especially Ruby Davies out of Australia, who says these are the actions that teachers take when they have high expectations for their students. And she made a list of all of these actions that teachers show, I believe, you can learn at very high levels. So high expectations teaching is part of how I think about rigor, the teacher's actions and behaviors. Does the teacher believe the student can achieve the grade level standards, or is the teacher teaching 3 grade levels below? But to rigor, I define rigor as a balance between difficulty and complexity. Difficulty is how much work, effort, or time we require from a student. Complexity is the level of thinking we require from them, the number of steps, the background knowledge, etc. And what we often see is, I'm rigorous, so I give students more work. And our students don't like that. They do not want more busy work. They do not want more filler activities. They expect, at least 52% of the students in the nation who are surveyed by Russ Qualia say, my classes are not challenging enough for me. There's not enough complexity to what I'm being asked to do. Complexity is the kind of thinking we require, not just more work. So we created this 4-quadrant grid. So if you take difficulty on one axis and complexity on the other, you have low, low, low difficulty, low complexity. You have low, high, low, and high, high. You have these 4 options, and I think all of them are important. So if you have low difficulty and low complexity, those are fluency activities, things we're asking students to build automaticity because they're not difficult and they're not complex. If I stretch them up the time, effort, and work, so we go up the difficulty but not complexity, that requires stamina. You have to persevere. You have to have grit. And so you'd have to take more time with it, more effort, more work, but not necessarily a more complex task. And right now, everyone I know is talking about our students don't have as much stamina as they used to have. Something happened. They're giving up on assignments really quickly. As soon as they get stuck, they're asking for help. So we have to rebuild some stamina. If I go the other side and I say I'm going to keep the difficulty low and jump up the complexity a little bit, that requires some level of strategic thinking, where students have to be consciously aware, like, I'm learning to make predictions, I'm learning to inference, I'm learning to set goals. And then the last quadrant, the high quadrant, I think of as, I call it the struggle quadrant. Not everybody loves that. Some people say, can you call it grapple? I think they're synonyms. I like the idea that students should struggle at school, that there are regular doses of struggle. I do believe American education is in an anti-struggle era. We over-scaffold, we over-front-load, we over-pre-teach, and we don't allow students to have that natural struggle, what Kapoor called the productive struggle. I don't think that should occur all period or all day or even all lesson. But balancing the idea of more work, time, and effort with the kind of thinking I'm looking for, the background knowledge and the number of steps in a process, I think gets us to rigor.
Do you think the aversion to that upper right quadrant that you described, the struggle or the grapple,
Yep.
is that somehow connected to a helicopter parent phenomena? And, I was just speaking to, I visited my daughter's college. She goes to Grinnell College in Iowa, and I went for family weekend and speaking with one of the professors, and I asked him, hey, so how many emails do you get from parents? And he just looked at me and shook his head and said, more than you want to know. And, you know, I mean, I went to college 30 years ago, and so there was no email, but there's no way my mom was communicating with any of my professors.
Yeah, me either. No way.
No way. So is that a societal thing?
It's a societal thing. I think we have this widespread anti-struggle mentality that things should come easy to us. If they don't, it's probably a sign that we're not good enough. And I think that's been internalized by a large number of teachers who say, if my students struggle, I'm not doing my job. And I don't think they would articulate it as such, because we have created a social expectation that students don't struggle in school, and if they do, you're not effective. Now, I'm not saying, struggle, hoodies up, heads down, weeping at the table, but grappling with ideas, having to persevere is really an important part of the learning process. And having those breakthrough moments where suddenly you get it feels amazing. That's also called intrinsic motivation. When you have that breakthrough moment and all of a sudden you understand something, there's no sticker or letter A that's going to come anywhere near what that feels like to grapple with something and all of a sudden get it.
It's a delicate balance too, right? So you think about a teacher in a classroom who says, I'm just going to let the kids. It can be, if used improperly, it can be an out for not doing enough in a classroom to support kids.
That's right.
Right? So I think that's probably where the art meets the science
Right.
in this profession.
Someone said to me, a teacher said to me, I'm very rigorous. Half the kids fail my class. Well, that's not a sign of success. And then the same person said, I grade on a curve. There's a normal distribution. And I said, well, if you know anything about statistics, a normal distribution means nothing interceded. You should have a significant right shift if you intervene, which means teach. And so to say there's a normal distribution means nothing we did worked because you have the normal distribution. You should have a right shift to positive learning if the teaching worked. And so it was a very tense moment to say, what you're saying is, 50% of the kids fail and you're rigorous and you grade on the curve because your teaching doesn't work. And it was a hard conversation. But it's back to this, like, I'm doing my job. I'm telling them things, and they're not learning it. I'd like to comment on scaffolding. So I think this gets wrapped up in this whole idea. I said we over-scaffold and over-front load. In reality, we have options in scaffolding. We can front-end scaffold. We can use distributed scaffolds or back-end scaffolds. For some reason in this country, we're very into front-end scaffolds. Teachers do work before the students encounter the lesson. I wish we would move to more distributed scaffolds. So some people call them just in case and just in time. Just in case is some of my students might struggle, so I lowered the reading level. Some of my students might struggle, so I teach them 10 vocabulary words in advance. Those are front-end just in case scaffolds. I wish we would move more to just in time scaffolds or distributed scaffolding and say, while they're in the learning process, what are the things I can do or say to guide their thinking without telling them what to think? That would be a shift more to distributed scaffolding. So we don't end up with a person who says, I make them do a bunch of stuff, they failed it, I'm a rigorous teacher, or I let them struggle, and they experience no success.
Do AI tools such as Chat GPT and other related tools that seem to have exploded onto the landscape recently, I mean, obviously they've been in development for a long time. Elon Musk has been saying that this is the greatest threat to civilization. He was saying it several years ago, and no one paid attention. And so now we're seeing these tools emerging, and they're emerging quickly. Fast. And full disclosure, I've played around with Chat GPT and bought up so I have more capacity, and it's an interesting exploration. Will those tools fundamentally change those quadrants that you talked about? Are they going to take out the lower left or shift that, right? Because perhaps in the future we won't need to do those lower level things. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think ChatGPT is our current, challenge as teachers, how to address it, incorporate it. But I read an article from the early 1900s where the chalkboard was going to be the demise of education. And there was this whole article about predicting American education would fail if we put a chalkboard in there. And so, TV was going to ruin kids. So there is...
It might have. No.
And it might, and there are some studies around but it didn't ruin everything.
Right.
We learned how to address it as a society. So ChatGPT for me is like that. I think there are some potentials with it in teaching. A teacher can say, I want to model some writing with students. ChatGPT, show me 4 different examples of voiced with this topic. So I want to talk about visiting the ocean, and I'd like to be a 4th grade perspective. I'd like it to be more of an academic perspective. It can produce them so fast for the teacher to do modeling. In terms of the lower quadrant, automaticity, if you don't develop some automaticity, you're probably not going to know what ChatGPT is giving you back. And so I think
critical thinking.
Yeah, right. So I think there's going to be times where students produce things, and then we're going to have conversations with them. We're going to say, show me this, or tell me more about what you were thinking here when you wrote this. I think we're going to have to figure out how to incorporate this just like we've incorporated other things. At our school, we use a computerized practice reading program. It doesn't matter which one we use, but we use one. And the students figured out within weeks of ChatGPT being released, they could copy the passage, paste it into ChatGPT, and it would tell them all the answers to the comprehension questions. So we've had to have conversations and say, you can do that. It works. But do you want to become better? Because someday you're going to be reading something, and it could be tomorrow, it could be next week, it could be in the future, and you won't understand it because your reading didn't grow. So yes, you can use ChatGPT. It doesn't matter. Get the questions right. But when you go to write the response, we're going to know, and we're going to ask you, do you really want to get better at reading? So we started creating some assignments that require them to use ChatGPT and to show us the moves of a writer. So why did ChatGPT start with this sentence? Why did ChatGPT do this? Tell us, analyze it. See, that's what it can't do yet. And maybe someday it will, but right now it can't analyze. So we changed an assessment, and we said to the students, so here's the entire thing is worked out. Here's all the answers. Here's all the work shown. The answer's wrong. Tell us where it's wrong and why. What was the thinking of the person on the step that got wrong? Right now, ChatGPT can't do that. The human can do that. And when you understand the content really well, you can find the patterns of error and start to identify them. That's the skill that we used to have to think of for teachers. Teachers had to think about patterns of errors of students and figure out what to do next and what caused that error. We're asking students to do that on our new assessments.
So here's an interesting reflection, and I was playing around with AI, even preparing for this interview, because you're way too prolific as a writer for me to have read everything you wrote and to have it in this overworked brain. So my reading has been spotty and situational, and I asked ChatGPT to give me your key books with key ideas in each one.
Awesome.
And your summary of your key research. And so for that task, which is factual,
right,
it was excellent, and it took 30 seconds.
Right.
So
which would have taken you hours.
Would have taken me hours or days, right? And so, but now I need to go through, and I have my highlighter, and I go through and go, oh, this seems like something that we need to talk about, and this doesn't seem that relevant for today's podcast. So I was thinking about, because our schools are IB schools, have the IB program, the IB organization, IBO worldwide, came out with really in the last month or so with a statement and a position on AI. And they basically said, hey, we know we can't ban it.
Right.
So students will need to cite it. They need to cite it. My daughter's college has a policy, which I'd never heard of this before. It may be more common, but I haven't been in college in a long time, and so she's my only child. If you get another individual over age 18 to help you in your writing, to proofread or edit, or she invites me to her Google Doc, she has to cite that in her paper.
Okay.
Kind of like when you write an academic paper or a book, in the at least in the foreword, you say thank you to these people. Blah, blah. So I thought that was a reasonable approach to a new tool. After all, having other humans help you get a different perspective, that's a tool.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, a lot of editing when young people are writing, or even older people, how much of it becomes their teacher's writing? How much becomes like, I've edited kids. I've edited my niece and nephew's papers many times. And at some point I think, have I crossed the line that it's my writing now because of my extensive editing, or is it still theirs? And I think there's been a line for that for a long time. Is, when is it the originator's work? And I do think your daughter's college is on the right track. Yeah. I had the following people give me feedback about, and maybe improve what I did. And here's the attribution to that. And it may be just the visceral reaction that many of us have to a machine doing something, That's right,
as opposed to another human.
Right.
After all, if you think about helicopter parents, how many of the helicopter parents are getting their friend who's an attorney to help their kid in college write a constitutional law paper or whatever, and that's kind of invisible and never even comes out.
Correct. Well, I'll tell you, Vista La Mesa loved projects. I am not an arts and crafts person. To this day, I'm not an arts and crafts person. But my teachers cared about this. And so my mother made missions and pyramids, and I would go to sleep and I would wake up and there was this amazing project done for me because she knows how much I hate doing that kind of stuff. Paper mache a balloon and all this stuff. She made it all for me in the night after I went to bed. So that thing, this has happened way before ChatGPT.
Yeah, all you need to do is go to Michael's And there's a whole section on the California fourth grade mission project. You can basically
buy all the parts.
And in one night you can, quote unquote, demonstrate that you learned
That's right.
a semester's worth of something.
Yep.
So shifting a little bit, actually on the same theme of innovation, you work in a charter school, and
Yes.
you also do extensive work for school districts and individual schools and at the university level. So you kind of see the whole chessboard.
Yep.
Charters are now 31 years old, 31, officially middle-aged. And the original charter, the intent of the original charter law was that charters were going to be a hothouse for innovation, kind of a petri dish that districts were going to emulate and learn from.
Right.
How do we know in the charter sphere if our innovations are the right ones and are in the best interest of our students? I think sometimes you can read mission and vision statements from charter schools, and everyone has something about lifelong learners, innovative, caring, empathetic. Like, apart from the fact that I'm not sure that charters are really that innovative anyway, we'll put that to the side for a minute. But just how do we know if the innovation is the right one? Is it even really worth it?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because we don't know if they're the innovations. But what we do know is there are some families out there who want to try something different. And they are interested, and they shop with their feet, and they say, I believe that this is a place where my child can learn. And parents have, in our state, the right to choose those things. And they can say, I want my kid to go to this school or this school or this school. The idea of being the incubator, I don't think has played out. We had one of the dissemination grants, and we chose 3 partner high schools in San Diego, and we tried to support them. And all I got a lot of was, we can't do this because of this. We can't do this because of this. You can only do that because you're a charter. No, we don't. That's not why. And one of the practices was restorative practice. We're going to disseminate restorative practices. And so, is there resistance? Yes. Is there some freedoms that charters have? Yes. But are we all here to improve the lives, the academic learning lives of our students? Yes. And I think this idea that we're fighting against each other and this, like, you stole our kids, it's just not healthy. There's innovation. There is an attempt to innovate in the charter network. And there's some schools, then traditional public schools, that I think are really trying innovation as well. We haven't got it right yet. Whenever someone gets it right, let's spread that innovation. None of us have it perfect yet. This is a work in progress to improve the quality of education across the country.
So anyone who does an AI search of your name in terms of articles and books is going to – it takes about 2 minutes for the AI to spit out the list, because you have a long list. You're very prolific as a writer and a presenter and a trainer across the country, and I think internationally too. You've done work at all levels, from preschool all the way up to the university level. Could you describe for our listeners what your daily routines are in terms of time management, in terms of carving out the physical space and the brain space to be able to write, present, think, work with students, work with adults? Just because, and this is selfishly, I want to know, because I can't match your output.
So a couple of things. So the idea incubation is our school. And I have several partner elementary and middle schools that I trust, and I'm always watching where we're learning, what we're struggling with, where we need to go next. And so the way I solve my challenges, my problems of practice, my goals, is to say, what are we working on? And I solve it by writing about it. So I get criticized at the university that I don't have a focus. I don't have a research area. You write about this, you write about this, you write about this. Yes, because I'm in a real school with real learners, adult and minors, and we are working our way through ideas. And for me to clarify what I think, I write about it. And to write about it, you have to read a lot of stuff. You have to synthesize it and figure out what you believe about that. So that's why I write. I write because it helps me clarify what I believe. In terms of my daily routine, so I'm a very fast writer. People don't, Nancy gets mad at me. It's like, you can write 6,000 words in a day. I can. But my running time, my spin bike time, my yoga time, whatever I'm doing each day is where I compose.
It's all, you're marinating.
Mm-hmm. And I can sit down because it's all been processed. The organization, the ideas, the examples. I want to use a third grade example here from this. I want to use this here. All that occurs when I am doing something much more physical, that I put my mind away while I do my run, while I do my bike, my yoga, whatever. And then I sit down at a laptop. I turn off everything else. There's no email. There's nothing else. And I write straight through. And about 2 hours, I'll take a break, and I'll come back, and I'll write. I write every Saturday. It's my writing day. I start around 8:30 in the morning, and I write till about 2:30 in the afternoon. And then I have a big family dinner every Saturday with all of my family comes to the house and hangs out with me all of Saturday evening. That's my routine. In the summer, I do a lot more focused writing. Like I might go on a writing retreat for a week. I'm lucky that way. I don't have a lot of responsibility in the summer. The summer school runs itself and that kind of stuff. So I can write a couple books in the summer and get my thinking. Then they'll go through the edits and the reviews and that kind of stuff, and I can manage that process during the school year.
And how do you fit in travel, presentations, conferences? Mm-hmm. I know pre-pandemic, I'm sure it was all in person.
Yeah.
And maybe now it's hybrid, but
you're
very active with ASCD and other organizations. Yeah. And so how do you fit all that in?
Nancy and I have a shared calendar, and we have a commitment that only one of us has gone at a time. And so like if I'm going to go off to an ASCD, luckily it's on spring break every year, so we both can go to ASCD's conference, summer conference, visible learning, that kind of stuff. So if I'm going to go, to work with a school system, let's say in Northern California, Nancy's not going to travel that day. So there's an ability to be present in school, present with teachers, present with students. Well, so I like to say we job share, that we have 50-50. So one of us can be doing this, and we've been friends and colleagues for 27 years. So right now, at this point, when we write, I can't tell what she originally wrote and what I wrote. If there's lots of commas in it, it probably came from Nancy. If it's not, it came from me. Other than that, it's probably going to be hard to tell because we think so much alike because we talk so much at school.
That's interesting. We always debate the serial comma.
So I am.
You
Oxford comma?
Yeah.
3 in a list or more? Yes. But she likes it. If she pauses, she puts a comma. So she's that kind of communicator, we call her. So she loves to have, if she's thinking and pauses, she makes a comma and then continues writing. And so, so there's a...
So you wrestle over commas at times.
Yeah, we do. I take them out. Whoever gets the last version before it goes to the editor, we can tell, you put a lot of commas in, I took a lot of commas out. I also like rare punctuation, so I can fit, this is weird, but if I can fit semicolons and colons in somewhere, I like that. My editor generally takes them out, but I like that. I think we should use all the punctuation options we have. My editor will take out every exclamation mark. She said your words should have the emphasis, not the punctuation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you write, and then
I design professional learning for our school based on what I write.
Got it. Yep. And then, so let's say on your Saturday you're writing for half of the day, and you're really intent on that, and you turn off all distractions. How does the cycle of your own editing fit in? So you're prolific. You said you can do 6,000 words in a day. Mm-hmm. You let that sit and marinate for some period of time before you come back to it.
Yep. Last weekend we went on a writing retreat. We left Friday afternoon. We went to Palm Springs. 2 colleagues met Nancy and I there. We rented an Airbnb 5-bedroom place, and we literally wrote all weekend. Last weekend, just recently, and we were really working through our thinking about how do you lead professional learning communities work? Because there's all this, does the leader have to show up at every meeting? Do you have to make teachers do notes to prove what they talked about? I mean, what is the leader's role in guiding and supporting professional learning communities. So we wrestled with this all weekend. It was interesting, and the debates we had, and we met over dinner and talked, and every 2 hours we came back together to our big wall of chart paper. We didn't finish it, but we got a really good organization. And now we can all 4 of us can take our parts at home and do more work over the next 2 months or 3 months or whatever it takes to finalize a product. That will then go to an editor. I've been working with the same editor across 3 countries. Lisa has been a phenomenal editor because she knows everything we've written. So she can say, well, in this book you said this. You remember that? And so, yes, our thinking's evolved. And, so it's been a very productive relationship. She's the one who started encouraging us 20 years ago to start doing like more book stuff. So
kind of practitioner books, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Practitioner books.
And I think that's an interesting balance because, as someone who's read a lot of academic writing, but I haven't always enjoyed reading academic writing, right?
Yep.
It's that practitioner voice that's
Yep.
more, I think, relevant and refreshing and fresh for the daily practitioner who doesn't have hours and hours to kind of wade through a pretty dense article.
Right. Here's an example. So as you were talking, I was thinking about this. Coming back from the pandemic, I started noticing that there are colleagues of ours that are just not finding us as credible as I remember being pre-pandemic. And I started thinking about like this idea of leader credibility and why are some people like questioning and wondering, and we're allowed to have debate and we're allowed to have healthy things, but I'm seeing leaders in many schools that I'm going to, like the staff are not trusting them. They're really not having this relationship. So I started reading about leader credibility. There's virtually nothing in education, but in business and healthcare and government, there's tons of stuff. And so I proposed that we write on leader credibility. I've never written about this before. But the team, Kathy and Dominique and Nancy and I, we read all kinds of stuff from business and healthcare stuff, and I really learned about leader credibility and that it is a malleable thing. We can choose to increase our credibility with people we work with. One surprise for me, one area of credibility is competence. The people who report to you judge your competence by your communication skills. The people who you report to judge your performance skills. Because by and large, if you're a superintendent or a principal or whatever, there's nobody on your staff who's done that job before. I mean, every once in a while someone will say, yeah, I have one principal who stepped down and became a teacher or whatever. It's rare.
Right.
And in your organization, I don't think anybody's been a superintendent before.
No.
So they don't know your job. So they think of your competence by how you communicate, which to me, when I read this, it explained why every time I go to a school and when I talk about what's not working, it's always communication. And when I ask what the solutions are, it's always communication, because that's how people judge our competence as leaders. But the people who supervise us, who mostly have done our jobs, and not in your case because of the board, but maybe a little bit different, but like the people you supervise, you're looking at their performance skills because you know the skill set you're trying to develop in those people as you grow their leadership capacity. So there's just fascinating things to learn.
My dissertation was on leadership storytelling. And I have to credit Ian Pumpian for a book that I read in one of his doctoral classes. I think it was called, I'm going to botch the name, but In the Right Mind or something. And it was a book about how the leadership of the future would be focused around the ability to tell stories that would be able to convey the mission and vision of an organization. And so I looked at successful principals across California and their use of storytelling, which in the private sector, in the business world, there's a lot of work that's been done and research on communication and connection between communication and results. But there wasn't much in education.
Right.
So it was really interesting to look at that. Of course, we know politics. In politics, that's probably 90% of the job.
Right.
That's
right.
Especially with TV and social media everywhere we turn.
I did my postdoc at the National Association of State Boards of Education, and our director, the woman at the time who ran the organization, said, when you talk to policymakers, you tell a story and you give a statistic. Those are the two things that speak to policymakers. They want to contextualize it. They want a story, usually N of one, and they want a statistic.
Yeah, and we could go on and on about story, but it's certainly the oldest form of communication, right? Around fires, prehistoric fires. Who are your role models, and how do you stay focused and motivated in your work?
Yeah. So you named one of my role models, Ian Pumpian. I've worked with him for years. He took a risk and hired me. He had a bunch of grants. I was looking for a different job. He took a risk and hired me. So he's one of my role models. He's one that his ability to synthesize and motivate is really strong. I've worked with John Hattie for 10 years now, and his mind and his ability to synthesize research is super impressive, and be able to say, there are 10 studies on this, and here's what it means to us as leaders, as teachers, as educators. Those are people that I really respect. I think that there are a range of teachers who have kept me motivated. When I go in their classroom and I watch them do their work and hone their craft, and they are in there with students every single day, and they taught through the pandemic, and now they taught simultaneous, and they taught hybrid, high flex, and now in person, and I just watch with such respect the things they're able to do. For my motivation, I end up not writing about things or moving on when I feel like we've solved it. And so that's kind of my legacy, is what can we solve? What do we really know? I think our graduate release work, it's very solid. It started in 1997. It is widely recognized now as an instructional framework that has evidence behind it to improve learning. And so I feel like we've solved that. So I don't really do much work on that anymore. Some other people do, but I feel like I've solved the idea of how you intentionally design learning experiences. So that's kind of on the side now. Other things that are more interesting or more pressing kind of take over my space.
What are you most hopeful about for both the present and the future of education in the U.S., like TK 16?
I think we're starting to recognize, with self-regulation work coming out, with motivation, with engagement, we're starting to recognize that the teachers have to develop students' ability, desire to drive their own learning. Some people, student responsibility, or I don't really mean that. I mean, I'm vested in my learning, and I need you as my teacher. And the teacher's role is different. It's not me telling you things or me assigning you things. And I don't think it's personalized learning. And I think that there's a lot of myths of you're going to get this, and you're going to get this, and you're going to get this. But it's a level of students saying, I'm responsible for my learning, and I know what to do next. And I know here's my role of my teachers and my peers in accomplishing that next. I do think we're going to revise our accountability stuff and all the assessment stuff. We're on a journey in that in California. It's being noticed around the world, around the country, that judging people based on a single score of a kid is just not. It didn't work. It was this big experiment, and it didn't work. In fact, like in some countries with high levels of accountability, suicide rates went up of teachers. People's careers were ruined. Teachers show up, leaders show up to do the best job they can for learners. We do need some accountability. I'm not saying we get rid of it. I think we're getting more and more conversations, and maybe influenced by the pandemic, what is reasonable to say? In Australia, they focus way more on growth than they do on jump the bar to grade level. And they reward schools that get good growth with students, recognizing there are some students who come to that school who are not performing well. They also use multiple measures. They don't do it like we do, like here, log in your computer on this day and answer all these questions, and we'll tell you how smart you are or how poorly you performed. I think we're going to get there. I think we're going to get more and more sophisticated with how we think about, is this school making progress with its students?
Where do you see education in the United States in 50 years? So, we've had in our lifetimes, there was Nation at Risk, and then we had then NCLB, and then, we saw in California, we had the API score, which
Yep.
was just a single point between 200 and 1,000.
Yep.
And now we've got a dashboard
5.
that we could talk all day about the dashboard.
Right.
Where are we in 50 years? I mean, I guess let's take a hopeful stance. Where do you hope we are in 50 years in education in the United States?
Well, I hope that we are at a place where students are treated with utmost respect, that their learning trajectories are planned and they understand where they're going, and that we recognize not everybody needs to go to college to be successful, but some do. That not everybody needs to achieve exactly the same ways and space as other people, but we're all on this journey, and there's not a bad place to be. And that we help young people reach their aspirations. We help shape those aspirations. Sometimes we want it more than they do temporarily, but that's where I'd like to be. I'd like to be at a place where schools are the center of a community, that schools serve their purpose in contributing to the development, the growth and development of young people, academically, socially, emotionally, physically. I think the reality is, if we look back, schools have not changed much in 100 years. So I get a little pessimistic every once in a while, like, is it even possible, as we have this enterprise called school, is it even possible to radically change it? I see idealism of excellence, I see some innovation, and it's shocking how it reverts back to the status quo of the past when certain people leave. I mean, we have like all this innovation, and then all of a sudden it reverts back. So I get a little pessimistic. I think we do a really good job. I think the vast majority of kids do really well in school. There are some that don't get a great experience, but how do we make it an amazing experience? How do you say to students, I belong here, I'm learning, I feel successful, I'm realizing my aspirations? That's where I want us to be. It's just pretty resistant to change as an institution.
How do you think about international comparisons of educational systems, right? Because periodically we'll hear,
oh, Finland.
yeah,
Finland's
Finland, the Finnish
amazing.
model, or the NAEP test, I think it is, right?
Nations Report Card.
Yeah, and so
Or the PISA.
Yeah, PISA, and we're number 42 in the world, and
Yeah.
like how should our parents and students and educators think about those things?
So, when you read these, we're compared to all countries, and if you read the analysis of countries with similar levels of poverty, we do really well. And if you take our districts that are very low poverty and you compare them to the nation, internationally, we're brilliant. We're spectacular. We aren't great yet at educating kids who live in poverty. And it's the crime committed against children by our society, as we allow them to live in conditions that are unimaginable. And you and I both work in schools that are deeply impacted by poverty. And there are young people who are so resilient and so much want things. I became really close to a student who's 26 now, and he was 14 when I met him and his family. And I'm just continually amazed that when you live in poverty, how many things become so much harder for you to solve. And he finally got a truck driver's license. He's driving big rigs. He's so happy now. And his wallet gets stolen. And he has no capacity to his phone and wallet. So he went to the phone store, and they said, unless you have an ID, we're not going to give you a SIM card. It cost him so much time and money.
Just to spiral down.
Spiral. And it's like, you got a good job, you're making good money, you're being responsible. And then one event spiraled him down. And so when you look at the international comparisons, we actually are really good compared to countries with similar levels of poverty that we have. And we're excellent if you look at school systems that have very low rates of poverty compared to countries that have low rates of poverty. We're very good. Now, the same thing like Finland, we've got a lot of comparisons. Like Finland, number one in the world. It was at the point, it's no longer, but we're number one in the world. And when you look at the system, it's very different than ours. Mm-hmm. It's very different. Mm-hmm. There are no private schools, as I understand. I've never been to Finland. It's kind of a source of pride that that I don't have to go to Finland to learn about amazing things that happen in schools, because there are amazing things happening in this country. But what I'm told is they don't have private schools, that all the kids are in the pool. I'm told that teachers are paid 106% of the national salary of everyone. that teachers have 25% time on prep. I don't know how much of this is true or not, but I'm not sure it's really healthy for us to do that. I think it's healthy for us to say, are there lessons we can learn about the experiences young people have and what's reasonable in our country to accomplish together? When I get pushed on the international comparisons, I say, where are the most patents filed in the world? By a huge margin, the U.S.
U.S.
Where are the innovations and the entrepreneurial ideas coming from? The U.S.
The U.S.
We lead the world in this, and our school system is what contributes to this. We are, because of our school systems, in part, in families and communities, but we create young people who believe they can do anything. And they invent things, and they're entrepreneurial, and they patent things, and that's part of our society. Other countries make the things that we invent.
Right.
And I'm really proud of that. I mean, we are innovative, and we are creative. We are very entrepreneurial. You can start a business in a minute in this country, and you can market yourself and advertise. And one of my former students said, I want to open a restaurant. I really think I'll be successful. He did it. He ran it himself. He worked every day at it. He messaged me the other day. He's 24 years old. He just opened his second restaurant in San Diego. He's got a full staff in both places. Another student of ours messaged me from Arizona. He owns and operates 12 group homes in the state of Arizona.
Wow.
I mean, you can do anything. And so that's what I'm proud of in this country. And I hope our education system continues to develop the cognitive flexibility to allow people to be entrepreneurial, innovative, creative.
So I don't want to kill that vibe, but I'm going to ask you this question because it's an ongoing struggle, and I'm sure it's come up for you and in your work and in your thinking over the decades. Homework. The role of homework, the relevance of homework, the importance of homework. Does it matter? Parents oftentimes, and perhaps parents who are less experienced or understanding of educational systems, tend to use that as a metric for rigor and importance, and is little Johnny doing what he needs to do?
Right.
What does the research say about homework? And if we're not aligning with the research in our schools, why does everybody keep giving homework?
Right. So the homework research is really interesting. So the average effect is very low, 20.23. But when you differentiate it by elementary versus secondary, it's even more interesting. So the effect size of homework at elementary is 0.01.
Oh.
That gets close to nothing.
That's almost just a rounding error.
Right. And maybe that's because who does the homework? Because we know a lot of parents do the homework when they're kids. The homework effect size in high school goes up to 0.55. And maybe it's because students are actually doing the homework. But the philosophical conversation is, how much work should students be asked to do outside of their workday? And that's a philosophical question in our society. How much work do we expect the teachers to do outside of their school day? How much time do we expect leaders to work outside of their school day? And is that contributing to the wellness issues in this country? And do we start it when you're 4 years old and 5 years old, that you must work X amount of time? I do think there's some evidence for getting young people to read outside of the school day, maybe do some writing, some preparation. I think the kind of homework we ask really matters. I think we haven't really understood the role of practice. I'll give you this example. So I don't know a parent who wouldn't drive their kid to soccer practice every day if the coach said you have to go to soccer practice. But they don't drive their kid to math practice. They don't drive their kid to reading practice. There's assumption that you don't need to do that it's, and there are other parents who say you're going to stay in your room and you're going to do your homework until it's done and don't come out. And it doesn't really seem to matter much in terms of achievement. We decided to make our school day longer and our class periods longer so that students would do the practice work under the guidance of a teacher. That's the philosophy that we operate under.
And no homework.
No homework.
At all.
Well, they have study skills and practice, but it's not homework that's collected the next day. Because we made the day longer and the classes longer so that we could do the practice in school while the teacher could monitor. We do have them read at home. We do ask them to do some practice, some review. We do a practice test, and they analyze it and figure out what they need to study. So studying is different to me than homework. Reading and reading volume is different to me than homework. When I think of homework, it's tasks that are repetitive, that are assigned to give you usually discrete practice on something that you were just taught. But we have a whole revolution that needs to happen on practice in general. How do we get all of us to engage in sufficient amount of practice so the instruction can stick? Because practice makes permanent, not perfect. And if you're practicing incorrectly at home at night and you're not doing it right, the teacher's going to have to spend a lot of time unteaching, reteaching the next day. So I think we need a bigger conversation about the role that practice, including homework, have in learning. And we're not there yet. I go to a lot of conferences, like you said earlier. It's all about instruction, teaching, the role of the teacher, how teachers teach. We don't really talk a lot about how do you get the right kind of deliberate practice to happen. And what do you need to be doing? Do you need the teacher to be watching you practice so that when something goes wrong, there can be additional learning? So,
thank you for that. I'll have to promote this a little bit with our parents too, and staff. It leads to really fruitful conversation and reflection. I have one more question for you, and then a thought experiment. So, my question is simply: is there anything that you would like to add to today's conversation that we haven't touched on? Something you're working on, a reflection, something that's been kicking around in your head as we've had this conversation today? Yeah,
the first thing that came to my mind was around student voice. And what do we mean by student voice? How do we grow student voice? I've been working on a project of what does this inspire you to do? Whether it's a text reading or an assignment or an activity, what does it inspire you to do? Because I would love it if 5-year-olds and 15-year-olds were inspired by the learning they did. And they get to say, I'm going to put on a play. I'm going to make a playlist. I'm going to write something. I'm going to debate. I'm going to go teach my younger brother. I would like it for students to be inspired and take action. And we count that as their learning, as evidence of their learning. So that's kind of intriguing to me, is how do we create inspiration in school? And what you're inspired to do might be different than me, and that's both okay. And my teacher can look at it and say, you've demonstrated a level of understanding based on what you were inspired to do, rather than saying everyone has to do the same assignment today. That's kind of on my mind a lot now, of how do we move to that level. I also think a lot on my mind right now is around attendance. How do we regain attendance? And it's across the country. It's everywhere.
Chronic absenteeism.
Mm-hmm. It's huge. And I was with a principal today from another school. She said her attendance is 81% this year. Yeah. And that's bad. And we know attendance makes a huge difference. If you're not there, you can't learn. So,
and I think it's my assumptions are it's skewing socioeconomically as well.
Of course. Yeah. That's what the data say. And it's some kids are saying, I need a wellness day. Okay. I don't have to be at school because there's nothing useful going to happen today. So I think we need to dig more deeply into this idea of attendance, and what do we do about it?
It's almost as if after the pandemic, people woke up and said, hey, wait a second, I actually have an option.
Right.
Those threads that bound us before to our school have stretched.
Right.
You stretch your tendons. They take a long time to come back, and they might not come back.
That's right. Right.
I was speaking with a school board member in the district, and we were talking about some schools that had 2/3 of their students chronically absent.
I saw that.
And it's just astounding.
Yeah.
How do you even start to tackle that? I know the state of California is somewhere north of 30% as a state.
Yeah.
Wealthiest state in the nation.
And 30% of our kids are missing more than 10% of their school.
More than 10% of their school. Wow.
Yep.
So I really wanted to thank you for your time, Dr. Fisher. This has been a real pleasure, and I'll be unpacking it in my mind over the next couple days and as I listen to this. But I wanted to end with a thought experiment. So you have the opportunity to design a billboard on the side of the 5 freeway. Mm-hmm. And this is a message to educators everywhere. Mm-hmm. And Folks have about 3 seconds to read it as they drive by. What does Dr. Fisher's billboard say to our educators?
2 come to mind, so I have to debate myself.
You can have 2 billboards.
Okay,
You've earned 2
Thank
billboards.
you. The first billboard is going to say, "Do you remember me?" And I think that is the most heartwarming thing that happens to us as teachers, and when kids come back and say, "Do you remember me?" And you flash over all the experiences you had with that young person. So that's one. The second would be, "You matter." And I don't feel like all of our teachers, our educators, leaders understand right now the powerful and amazing impact they're having. They are feeling generally that their efficacy is low, that what they're doing is not making a difference. And when our efficacy is low, it's demoralizing. And I can't emphasize enough the fact that you come to school and you work so hard to ensure students are learning and they're loved and they're cared for. You make a difference. You matter.
And because you like exclamation points, so we're going to
give me one.
I'll give you one right there.
Okay.
So that's a perfect place to wrap for today. Thank you so much for giving of your time and your expertise today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Superintendent's Hangout. You can follow me on Twitter at DVS1970. Please be sure to share this show with friends and family on social media and in the real world. Thank you to Brad Bacayal for editing and production assistance, and to Tina Royster for scheduling and logistics. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great day.